Okay, let's unpack this. Have you ever felt like the ground beneath you is shifting, especially when you look at massive global events and then, well, glance at your own bank balance?
Hmm.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a topic that feels both abstract and incredibly personal: the rapidly evolving war economy.
Yeah, it's a heavy term.
It is. And we're going to be drawing on some sharp insights from financial investigative journalist Arno Wellens. He's known for his pretty incisive analysis of the euro, European debt, and those subtle power plays happening in Brussels.
And what's particularly striking about this, I think, is how directly it impacts individual lives. We'll be exploring what it really signifies when nations commit billions to defense, while, the purchasing power of everyday citizens just seems to evaporate.
Right.
And crucially, we need to consider what truly happens to your hard-earned savings if the Eurozone faces an economic crisis, maybe even more profound than what we saw back in 2008.
Exactly. So our mission today is to cut through the noise, get you genuinely well-informed about these complex, intertwined issues quickly and clearly.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to walk away with some surprising facts, hopefully a deeper understanding of the forces at play, and a much clearer picture of how these monumental shifts resonate directly with your life and your future.
Let's do it.
So let's start with that term, war economy. That sounds pretty stark, doesn't it?
It does.
When Arno Wellens talks about a war economy, what exactly does he mean? Is it simply like producing more tanks and fewer cars?
Well, to put it simply, this concept really boils down to a fundamental economic principle. It's known as the indifference curve.
Okay.
Essentially, it highlights that any resource, money, labor, materials that you dedicate to one sector, say defense, cannot simultaneously be used for another, like civilian goods or education or social welfare.
Wait, it's a direct trade-off, unavoidable.
Oh, exactly. Think of it like a national budget. Every dollar or euro spent on a new fighter jet is one not spent on, a new hospital wing. And this trade-off, it deeply impacts public well-being, even if it's not immediately obvious.
And building on that, Arno emphasizes something that's often misunderstood, what he calls the broken window fallacy.
Ah, yes, that one's important.
He argues pretty forcefully that war itself, and even significant prolonged defense investment, it's not profitable for a nation as a whole. In fact, he sees it as a 100% cost.
Mm.
When you fire a rocket, it's gone, incinerated. There's no direct economic return, no lasting asset. It's like burning money, but, with explosives.
Yeah, it's destruction, not production in the useful sense. He points out, I think, how the U.S. Congressional Budget Office often calculates zero long-term economic pluses from military spending, unlike almost any other government spending.
Wow, zero.
Which naturally prompts us to ask, okay, if it's purely a cost in a national sense, why do some politicians, like you mentioned the Netherlands Minister of Defense, why do they often imply there's some kind of economic benefit to ramping up defense spending?
Good question.
Historically, nations have taken very different paths. Nazi Germany, for instance, famously sacrificed freedom for production, basically forcing citizens into factories. The Soviet Union, they literally diverted vast resources from civilian goods, medicine, hospitals, poured it all into weapons.
Right.
The U.S. during WWII did make a massive switch, but they also earned significant money by selling weapons to allies.
Yeah.
But generally, the reality of war brings immense loss, pain, generational trauma, not profit for the general population.
So politicians should really be upfront, saying this defense funding means less somewhere else.
Ideally, yes. If they were truly transparent, they'd say, okay, this means higher taxes or less for schools or maybe reduced healthcare services. It's a direct choice.
Which brings us to Europe today. Why this sudden, really rapid pivot towards more defense spending? It feels like just yesterday the continent was scaling back military budgets quite significantly. What actually changed?
Well, looking at the broader context, Europe's defense production capacity was, you could say, systematically dismantled over decades.
Systematically? How so?
You had progressive parties, major pension funds, environmental groups, all actively campaigning against investing in the arms industry for ethical reasons, environmental reasons.
Like ESG investing and that sort of thing.
Exactly. This led to a dramatic scaling back of orders, a real hollowing out of industrial capability, and a kind of moral boycotting of these companies. And this had profound long-term consequences for Europe's ability to produce its own defense kit.
So it was a conscious, almost ideological decision by many actors within Europe to disinvest.
Yeah.
That's a really critical piece of context, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It explains why building it back up isn't as simple as just, flipping a switch.
Right.
You can't just pick up the phone to some fictional Johnny Arms dealer and order 100 tanks off the shelf, can you?
Precisely not. What takes a single day to destroy can easily take 20 years to rebuild. Factories, skilled workers, supply chains. And a particularly interesting aspect of this is who stepped into that void. When European investors, driven by these ideological reasons, pulled out, American asset managers like Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity, BlackRock, Goldman Sachs, they quietly began buying up shares.
Buying shares in European defense companies.
Yes, key ones like Germany's Rheinmetall. They recognized a powerful, long-term macroeconomic trend. They simply acquired what Europeans were, in effect, ideologically dumping.
Wow. Okay, so the profound insight here is that while Europe dismantled its own defense capacity, creating this void, American financial giants stepped in, which means Europe's future defense and the profits from rebuilding it are now increasingly controlled and influenced by external non-European interests, even as European taxpayers fund the expansion.
That's the situation, yes.
But, okay, beyond the factories and the weapons, what does this mean for the people who actually serve? For the military personnel themselves, the soldiers on the ground?
That naturally prompts the question, how do you even staff these larger armies they're talking about? We're facing a severe recruitment problem across NATO.
Why is that?
Well, consider a sergeant's salary, for example. It's often completely insufficient to buy a house, especially in expensive urban areas near bases. It takes years to find, train, and crucially retain an experienced tank sergeant. That expertise can't be conjured overnight.
And I guess the trainers and recruiters were cut back too.
They were, and the political hypocrisy here is, well, it's truly glaring. You see former leaders like Mark Rutte, who presided over deep defense cuts. Cuts that led to soldiers literally practicing pang-pang, miming gunshots because they had no bullets for training.
I remember those stories. Pang-pang. Unbelievable.
Right. And now, as NATO Secretary General, he's demanding higher spending from the very nations whose armies were systemically weakened under policies he supported. It feels deeply disrespectful to the military personnel who endured those cuts.
It certainly sounds like Europe is caught in a very difficult, almost self-made position.
Right.
But, okay, if the threat from, say, Russia is truly as acute and imminent as the rhetoric often suggests, why do the actions of European leaders seem so incredibly, well, contradictory?
That's the key question, isn't it? What's noteworthy here is the significant disconnect between the urgent rhetoric and the actual practical realities on the ground.
How so?
Well, Russia's economy, for instance, is relatively small. It's comparable in size to maybe the Netherlands steel region or the entire Iberian Peninsula.
Right.
Not insignificant, but not a global superpower economy.
Okay.
And its military doctrine is largely outdated, still reliant on rail-based supply lines, which are notoriously vulnerable, easily disrupted. The primary threat they pose, realistically, is nuclear.
Which, ironically, stops NATO from intervening conventionally.
Precisely. It acts as a powerful deterrent against a conventional NATO intervention, making a large-scale land invasion of Western Europe. Well, quite unlikely in that specific form.
So, if Russia's conventional threat is perhaps overstated, why the massive urgency for Europe to rearm now? And why does Europe provide Ukraine with older, some call old junk, vehicles from the Korean War era, while largely withholding the most advanced systems?
Yeah.
And countries like France still only produce, 2 Rafale jets per month? Why such a significant delay in scaling up production if there's a truly existential threat on the horizon? You'd think they'd be all in, wouldn't you?
Absolutely. And the immediate follow-up question is, if European leaders genuinely believed a full-scale invasion was imminent, why wait 3 years after the invasion of Ukraine to even consider scaling up production?
Good point.
France, a major European military power, is only now discussing increasing Rafale jet production from 2 to maybe 5 per month. Look at the UK selling crucial amphibious assault ships for mere millions to Brazil.
Selling them off.
Yes, despite its own military advising strongly against it.
Yeah.
Creating a significant capability gap, apparently for short-term budget reasons. These actions, prioritizing short-term savings or incredibly slow production ramp-ups amidst claims of an existential threat, they very strongly suggest that other interests are at play.
That's a very strong assertion there. Arno Wellens is suggesting that despite the dire warnings we keep hearing, these are calculated decisions, not just panic. So what other interests specifically are we talking about here, beyond just the immediate military need?
Well, zooming out a bit, if you follow the money, it points primarily towards the American arms industry. Giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon.
Okay.
When figures like Donald Trump exert pressure on European leaders, people like Ursula von der Leyen urging them to purchase hundreds of billions in U.S. weapons orders that Europe, remember, cannot fulfill itself because of its dismantled capacity.
Right, the capacity isn't there anymore.
The stock prices, these American companies surge dramatically. We're talking about CEOs making direct calls to politicians, super PACs channeling money from these corporations into political campaigns. It's an incredibly powerful lobbying machine.
So it becomes less about defense and more about...
It starts to look less like genuine collective defense for Europe and more like significant economic gain for very specific external entities. And for you, the European taxpayer, this means your money is being directed towards external corporate profits rather than perhaps your own nation's direct security priorities or domestic needs.
Okay, let's bring this back down to earth then. Europe's own defense industry intentionally scaled back, American companies positioned to profit immensely, politicians playing this complex game. What does all of this mean for you, for your daily life, your savings, your future plans, maybe buying a home?
This naturally prompts us to ask about how this massive increase in defense spending is actually going to be financed.
Right, where does the money come from?
Given that most major economies are already running significant budget deficits, especially after the pandemic, the most likely, perhaps the only way to fund these colossal increases is through even more government borrowing. More debt.
And more debt usually means?
It will inevitably force central banks to keep interest rates low or even lower them further, just to keep the cost of servicing all this new debt manageable for national treasuries.
Okay, and here's where it gets particularly impactful for your wallet, right? Lower interest rates mean more money effectively flooding the economy. And as history consistently shows, when more money chases the same or fewer goods and services, what's the inevitable outcome?
Inflation. Plain and simple. And it risks an even larger euro crisis than we saw in 2008.
Larger than 2008.
Potentially. The European Central Bank has, in effect, maintained artificially low interest rates since about 2010. Primarily, let's be honest, to prevent heavily indebted southern European countries like Italy or Greece from collapsing under their debt burdens.
So that policy's been driving inflation already.
It's been a major driver, yes. And very visibly, it's fueled a massive housing bubble. In the Netherlands, for instance, houses are now selling for around 11 times the median salary.
11 times.
Compare that to just 4 times the median salary back in the 1980s. This isn't some accidental side effect. Central banks have effectively prioritized stimulating the economy and propping up asset prices over aggressively tackling inflation for well over a decade now.
And this isn't just about money or house prices, is it? It hits fundamental societal structures, families, demographics.
Absolutely. One fascinating and frankly disturbing element here is what Arno Wellens calls reverse solidarity.
Reverse solidarity. What's that?
While the incredibly wealthy think Bernard Arnault of LVMH saw their fortunes double, even triple during the pandemic thanks to central bank asset purchases inflating asset values.
Right.
The middle class, including those very nurses and soldiers we talked about earlier, are consistently bearing the cost. They can't afford homes, and this is directly contributing to a demographic crisis. Birth rates are plummeting across Europe. Czechia's birth rate, for example, is down by 1/3 since the pandemic. Germany's is down 8%. People can't afford to start families if they can't afford a stable home. This impacts the very fabric of our society, making it increasingly difficult for younger generations to build families, achieve financial stability, and, contribute to a thriving future economy.
Okay, it all sounds incredibly discouraging when you lay it out like that. Systemic issues, complex political maneuvering, economic traps everywhere. How does one, as an individual, even begin to navigate a landscape like this? How can you build a more self-reliant future amidst all this uncertainty?
Well, first and foremost, the advice is don't give up. Don't let yourself be demotivated into inaction. Arno Wellens puts it clearly. Keep running. Don't sit still.
Keep running.
Don't flee. Instead, stay here and fight for the functioning democracy and the rule of law we still possess, which, in a historical context, is an incredibly rare and precious privilege. Think about it compared to many places, many times in history, even maybe your parents' generation in certain countries. Our current level of human rights and stability is a gift. It's worth defending.
That naturally prompts the question, though. If Europe truly wants to seriously beef up its defense capabilities, what's a concrete, effective action that would actually work and benefit its own citizens? Keep the money circulating within Europe.
Okay, here's a practical idea. The most immediate and arguably most effective way to boost defense spending and recruitment, while crucially keeping the money within European economies, is simple. Double military salaries.
Double them.
Imagine a sergeant making what a colonel does today. This single action would instantly attract talent, drastically improve morale, and directly address those housing and quality of life issues plaguing military personnel. It would immediately boost defense spending metrics in a very tangible, beneficial way.
But that's not happening.
It's not happening. Why? Likely because it doesn't primarily serve the interests of foreign arms manufacturers. Instead, what do you hear talk of? Reintroducing conscription.
Right. The draft.
Which is effectively free labor. Now, why would you rely on free labor if you're truly serious about creating a professional, highly skilled, well-staffed military for national defense? It's a telling contradiction, isn't it?
It is. Okay, so beyond those large-scale policy ideas, what can we do?
Yeah.
In our personal lives, especially if we're feeling that intense squeeze from high housing costs and persistent inflation.
Right. Expanding on that point about not sitting still, it's about actively taking control of your internal locus of control. What can you influence?
Okay, like what?
Build significant financial buffers. Aim to save maybe 500 euros a month, for example. That might mean making tough choices, cutting luxuries, perhaps taking on extra work. It's about creating resilience.
And skills.
Critically, acquire valuable and adaptable skills. Think beyond just traditional education. Practical trades, digital literacy, critical thinking, especially for navigating complex information these days, maybe even entrepreneurial abilities. Don't just blindly trust the system to fix things for you.
What about housing? You mentioned the bubble. Is buying now crazy?
It's tricky. For those who are in a position to do so, despite the current high prices, buying a house might still be a strategic move. Yes, a long-term correction is always possible. But current policies, the existing housing shortage, which is exacerbated by migration and restrictive building regulations, and the historical tendency for the system to bail out mortgage banks.
Meaning homeowners get protected?
Effectively, yes. It suggests prices could just stagnate at these high levels or maybe even continue to rise slowly. And renters, in that scenario, end up effectively paying for homeowner security through the system without ever acquiring the asset themselves. It's a tough calculation.
And
Finally, stay deeply politically aware. Demand transparency. Question your politicians directly. How will you finance these grand plans? Where's the money coming from?
don't be afraid to ask the awkward questions.
Exactly. Don't allow yourself to be pushed into a corner, labeled a conspiracy theorist or an extremist for asking perfectly reasonable questions about fundamental issues like birth rates or housing affordability. When the middle class is being squeezed this hard and young people can't even afford a place to call home, that is a profoundly valid political question, not an extreme one.
Right.
You know the saying, hard times create soft men create hard times. We collectively need to choose to be hard right now, hard in our resilience, our informed engagement, and our willingness to question things.
So, wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? The deeper we dive into these issues, the clearer it becomes, I think, that the decisions made at the highest levels of government and finance, they have a profound, direct, and often under-discussed impact on your life, your home, your future.
Absolutely.
The narrative often presented by politicians about defense spending, economic stability, even our societal well-being, it frequently hides these complex realities, doesn't it?
Yeah.
A cascade of unintended consequences, particularly for the middle class and for young people just trying to build a stable life. It's a stark reminder, really, that blind trust in the system without doing your own critical inquiry can indeed cost you a lot more than just money.
And ultimately, this deep dive hopefully encourages you to not just grasp these powerful forces, but to actively engage with them. Your personal ability to adapt, to diligently save, to continually develop valuable skills, and critically, to hold your leaders accountable for their actions. That is your greatest defense. It's your most potent form of agency in these increasingly uncertain times.
So next time you hear a politician make a grand promise or talk about some monumental shift, maybe take a moment. Ask yourself, okay, what's the real cost of this? Who truly pays the price and who ultimately benefits? And perhaps even more importantly, what can I do right here in my corner of the world to build resilience and secure my own future? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep taking informed action.